in Europe is his earlier work. His earlier work authorized Americans to talk about the Middle East without knowing anything about its languages or its history or its culture. And it was important work that really changed the way people in the United States think, on the one hand, but on the other hand, he moved back toward a lot of these ideas of the two worlds being interconnected in ways that has not been adapted and has not had the same amount of influence. And my argument is that the later work does not have the influence because of this irony, that in the era of globalization, interest in global and intellectuals and the embodied intellectual and the institutional implication of intellectual started to wither away in metropolitan discourses and theory and method. See where I am now? Okay. So, the next section of my paper is called Intellectuals versus Theorists. And I'm getting close to the end, so bear with me. Thank you for your patience. These are two scholars that I would have talked about if I read through the whole study. So there's a section in the study devoted to the way Marilena Chaui in Brazil and Wang Xiaoming in China deal with the crisis of intellectual and their specific geohistorical location in ways entirely comparable to Al-Alsun. And so the idea of this is to show the potential for looking at global intellectuals as contributive to metropolitan discourses, but also to look at the topic of the intellectual as an urgent topic, even in the era of globalization, if we can just step outside the bibliographies of the United States and Europe. I want to quickly touch on here also the problem of translation. Marilena Chaui came to my attention through a translation project that I'm involved in, which is a book series that I'm co-editor of along with Gayatri Chakraborty-Spivak. And the idea of it is specifically to find influential, theoretical, critical texts written outside of Europe and North America. And so the first version of this series, we called it Theory in the World, and that's the one where we published Marilena Chaui's essays. And it didn't work to work with a publisher because it was too radical of a project for just any publisher, so we had to break off our relationship with our original publisher, and now starting with a new publisher based in India. And the new version will be called Elsewhere Text. And the writers that we've published so far are from Brazil, Chaui, from Mexico, Marta Lamas, from Lebanon, Khaled Zieda, and the new version will include writers from China, Bolivia, and Korea to start with, and then we're going to expand from there, is the idea. I can't tell you how much I learned about the institutional obstacles to talking about theory outside of a European context by working on this project. So I would love to talk more about that during the question and answer time, but believe me, these issues are not theoretical. There are hard, solid, concrete obstacles to expanding our bibliography of thinkers, and I learned about it through this work. Anyway, I invite you to, if you can get your hands on it, to take a look at Marilena Chaui's collection of essays that we published in this series as a way of sort of seeing what kinds of things we're missing by not translating intellectual work from the whole world. So, intellectuals versus theorists. Intellectual versus theorists. Out of the critique set forth by Al-Alsun, the geographical and cultural divide between a European, North American metropole and the less acknowledged cultural centers of the global South is reflected in the revealing distinction between those who are labeled theoreticians and those who conceive of themselves as intellectuals. The former is a historically contextualized and bedraggled figure that seems in the metropolitan center to have gone the way of the dodo bird. but which still proliferates in the global south if often critiqued and diminished by observers both inside and out. A theorist is conversely someone who produces systems and methods that help shape our thinking. In this sense, places like the Arab world or China have no theorists. Rather, the region remains what a Harvard Orientalist quoted by Al-Alsun in one of his early studies called a, quote, no idea producing area. So all of you, according to these Orientalists in the 60s, live now in a no idea producing area. An intellectual is something different. Intellectuals have bodies that belong to social classes and are the products of their moment and their region. In the case of Arab intellectuals, they are even incarcerated in their bodies, their regions, and their times. So, for example, there were essays in the New York Times after the beginning of the 2011 Intifada in the region, saying, oh, none of the Arab intellectuals predicted this. And this shows that there's no life, intellectual life in the Arab world. As if the whole purpose of an intellectual is to sort of be some sort of soothsayer that predicts the future, right, rather than to produce intellectual work. So the intellectual is far from the center of the world republic of letters, but theorists are so central that they constitute a kind of sun that cannot be looked upon directly without undertaking the risk of total blindness. These interlocking assumptions license us to undertake partial readings of what intellectuals have written and extrapolate from these representations of them as symptomatic figures. Okay, and now this is the concluding section. I begin by citing Casanova's critique of the incarceration of contemporary literary practice within national boundaries. The passage in question ends by stating the goal of her study to be an exploration of, quote, what theoretical instruments are available for viewing the literary across boundaries that we have come to openly acknowledge as constructed or imagined, end quote. Here her opening specifically invokes the question of method, but the subsequent study treats the theoretical dimension as closed off from the globalized questions of power so systematically invoked in the book's pages, is therefore all the more remarkable. Furthermore, the exclusion of theory and theoreticians from the globalizing impulse that proliferates around the, quote, world literature, end quote, discourse that Casanova and several other prominent critics, including David Damrosch and Franco Moretti, have engendered, might plausibly be seen as a direct result of this omission within the world literature, in quotation marks, bibliography. And the reintroduction of the figure of the intellectual drawn from the critical writing of figures like Al-Adawi or Meralena Chawi might productively amend this omission. The homology that connects the academic theoretician's relationship to the third world and the historical relationship between the colonial center and its periphery has by now been carefully delineated through the work of scholars, including Barbara Harlow, Walter Mignolo, Masao Miyoshi, David Lloyd, Ray Chow, and of course Vivek Said, who I've been talking about. In the colonial economy, raw materials came from the plantation or mine in the colony and were brought to the imperial center to be manufactured and have value added. In a certain type of institutional post-colonial studies, once again, the raw materials, which are novels, poems, and plays, travel to the center to be infused with meaning and significance by the metropolitan critic. In sum, the East proposes and the West disposes. The plight of the global South intellectual is even more troubled than that of other global South writers. If it can be said that critical practice has maintained an ahistorical prejudice in favor of the concept of the Western theorist floating above history, in spite of the work of these critics, such a situation is humbling indeed and raises the question of how to foster a more consistently and thoroughly historicist method. Now, my position is not that only a Chinese theorist can talk about Chinese literature. I'm not saying that at all. This is a position that tacitly rejects the whole idea of the comparative methods that theoretical approaches to literature are based upon. And it mistakenly builds on the notion of what Spivak has helpfully critiqued as a counter-essentialism in her series introduction to the series that we're doing together. Rather than invoke counter-essentialism, I have focused on global institutions and their role in producing theories and ideas as an element of critical practice that can contribute to broader historicism. One motto that inspired critics interested in both theoretical and historical dimensions of literary practice during the late Cold War 1980s was Frederick Jameson's pithy charge at the beginning of his book, The Political Unconscious. that we should, quote, always historicize, end quote. An imperative updating of the dictum might go something like this: always geo-historicize everything, even Frederick Jameson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Aboul-Ela, for this interesting presentation. And now we open it up for questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Yes, Professor, please.
Mohammed Kumi Institute for Study Abroad, Butler University.
So, Professor, can I ask you please to the mic with us, please? Maybe some of the ushers will help us with the mic. I will do this.
Mohammed Kumi Institute for Study Abroad, Butler University. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for taking such a long trip across the US and across the Atlantic to come to address us. At one point you spoke about where the individual is placed in the globe. I'm not specialized in literature, but I would like you, if you can recommend a book for me to read or an author addressing this question of where the individual / intellectual is placed in the globe.
Yeah. Well, my own work is focused currently on Al-Alsun. So I think, the Crisis of Intellectual is a rather old book now. For me, that's one of the places to start. It's difficult, you're asking a difficult question, right? Because it's a long bibliography. So my answer is going to be idiosyncratic, and it's going to go back to what I'm personally focused on. Al-Alsun translated his own book in Arabic, and he called it Al-Alsun. So it's interesting, the difference between the idea of the book being about intellectuals and the book being about history. And so for me, to sort of link these different essays together and think of the two versions and think of the two titles is to think of the link between the individual thinker and history. So that's one place I would look. There has to be something more recent. It would not be the World Republic of Letters. It would not be any of the other works that are influential in this world literature debate. Because for me, that all of them are sort of talking about the global travels of texts. But the whole problem with them is the invisibility of the critic. Chaoui's book is called Between Conformity and Resistance. And it talks about Spinoza, and it talks about Brazilian history. I actually am going to think about your question and try to come up with other suggestions. But I do want to say a few things about Between Conformity and Resistance. When we were in the process of trying to get the book, so these are the kinds of problems that we had with our publisher. The book was finished. First of all, it's very difficult to find someone to translate such a book. The number of people that can translate a work of critical theory written in Portuguese or Bengali or Arabic or Chinese in the whole world is minimal. You could maybe find many, many more people who can translate historical text or a literary text, but to translate a theoretical, critical text, there's almost no one. And the few people that live on the earth that can do that are busy. Publishers do not want to make it worth their while to stop what they're doing, and the academic institutions we work in don't want to reward us for this kind of work either. They just think, oh, you did a translation. So when Between Conformity and Resistance finally was ready to be published, it almost didn't come out because Professor Spivak insisted that we take the word Brazil out of the title. And her argument was that this is a work of theory, even though it talks about intellectuals in Brazil, and the essays are dealing with popular culture in Brazil and this sort of thing. This is a work that many writers will relate to in many different contexts. And so we need to take the word Brazil out of the title. And of course the publisher's interest was they wanted people that do Google searches and that do searches on JSTOR and other sorts of databases. If they type in Brazil to find the book. And so the book almost didn't come out because Professor Spivak, being someone who knows what she thinks, insisted on her, on having Brazil taken out, and then it was finally taken out. So the idea is to say you'll learn a lot about Brazil by reading the book, but I think you'll also see a certain answer to your questions. Even, that we're working on a text now for the new version that's a translation of a Chinese. Apparently in China right now, and I'm not an expert on China, but apparently in China right now, that there's a new movement, an intellectual movement that is trying to bring back socialism, which has been waning in China, and combine it with feminism. So this is specifically feminists, women scholars, who are working on the erasure of socialism in Chinese academic discourse. And we have an excellent text. And the first problem was to convince the expert on China who brought it to us that it would work as a work of theory, because she said, this book is about China. Do you ever publish things about a place like China? And I had to try to convince her, look, what we've learned by doing this work is that more places are like China than are like France. More places can understand these issues of being of the inside-outside problem, the east-west problem, the north-south problem, the problem of economic resources and their relationship to intellectual production and academic work. These are universal questions, and only in the richest institutions in the United States do you not have to deal with them. So my answer to your question is look at the books in our series, Theory in the World and Paul Gray Macmillan, and elsewhere text when it comes out. And in the meantime, I'll try to think of the title of somebody who's tried to put this all together and looking at many different spaces. There is a book that people cite, right? Arjun Appadurai Modernity at Large, right? Which is a book from the 90s that I'm sure some of you know. Arjun Appadurai Modernity at Large. And it's a very influential book and speaks about this issue from an anthropological perspective in a certain way, and it is helpful. Yes, but it's not necessarily directly related to the way I'm thinking about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. Wait for the mic. For Angie? Yes. Kindly. Maybe you have to stand up, please, and come forward a little bit. So I think, okay, try this one.
Morning, Angie from Keynote University. In this crisis of the intellectual that you were talking about, I am just curious to know, where do the Arabs stand? Okay, putting into consideration all the prejudices against them, the stereotyping, and all these issues. So where do they stand in this crisis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So trying to be brief about this, and I think one of the ways to answer that would be to say, so Al-Alawi is not the first person, not the first Arab thinker to link the Orientalism to colonial politics. He did it before Said, but there were others. You could go all the way back to Al-Albani and find many in between the two of them. So I would say one of the answers to your question is to sort of think about this critique of Orientalism. And, Edward Said talks about the special place of Orientalism in European thinking. Orientalism also puts the Arab thinker in a special place, because the Arab individual, whether it's the peasant or whether it's the intellectual or whether it's any other member of Arab society, the Arab citizen is sort of a special point of focus of Orientalism. So if you go all the way back to Al-Alsun and his answer to Ernest Renan, and then come forward to Alawi, and also there's a new kind of discussion of these issues that comes from people that are reading, in the region, that are reading Edward Said, translated into Arabic, and then responding. And so the special place is to be able to see the geohistorical location as having a special significance for all thinkers. Because the critique of Orientalism is a kind of critique it's a critique based on the geographic location of the thinker. Right? I think that's probably not exactly what you were thinking when you were asking the question, but I would say that that's one answer to the question, is to say that potentially, if you have a kind of consciousness about your place as an Arab thinker or as an Arab citizen even, then you understand the importance of geohistorical location with a special sensitivity, potentially.
Other questions? Would you find
Thank you very much for a very illuminating talk. I'm very impressed. To be honest, when I had the title of your presentation before the conference, World Theory, I was skeptical. But I'm very impressed by your insights. A follow-up on the question from the University of Helwan, the Arab intellectual. Yourself as a specialist in cultural theory or literary theory, Edward Said himself as a literary theorist, both of you have a specific position speaking from American academia. That's very different. But my colleague here was asking about the Arab intellectual speaking from the Arab world. It's the question of the positionality, your position, and that's a big question. In fact, I think we are confronting a crisis, the crisis of the intellectual on a global level and the crisis of the intellectual in the Arab world. The guest speaker at the World Poetry Day, Ahmed Abdul-Mati Hijazi, is an excellent example of that. As an intellectual who was banned and vanished. As an intellectual who couldn't find a voice, but he survived. And it's an odyssey, all right? That's a big question, and I cannot remember a literary theorist in the Arab world. This is your project, Edward Kharat, from Egypt, speaking from Egypt, Professor in Women's College. These are unique, but who are the followers? That's a big question for us. I thank you very much for the whole definition of theory by Edward Said, but I recall a definition of theory by David Lodge. Theory is a mixture of language, literature, and philosophy. Very basic, very simple. And it seems that theory defies definition, as it were. Do you follow Said's definition, you believe fully on it, or can you offer another one? And last but not least, you began with historicism, and you ended with Jameson, always historicized,